Everyone, it's lovely to worship together, and it was great to hear those testimonies this morning. I don't think you can beat that. I draw your attention to the floral display today. It's there for a particular reason, because this particular week, on Friday, we celebrate Australia Day. And I'm going to use this morning the theme of Australia Day to develop into something else which we as Christians need to think very seriously about. It was on May 13, 1787, that a fleet of ships, 11 in all, left England to sail to Australia. That fleet of ships was known as the First Fleet. The commander of the fleet was Captain Arthur Phillip, and they had come out to Australia to set up a penal colony. In other words, a prison colony. It's pretty hard to escape from a great big island, I suppose you could call Australia an island, if you were a convict. And they came to Botany Bay in New South Wales because Lieutenant James Cook, who had explored the east coast of Australia in 1770, said this would be a good place. There was another reason too, because what's now known as the United States of America had been previously a penal colony, but the rebellion that occurred in America severed the ties with England. There were 13 colonies that had been established in the United States of America, or what is now called the United States of America. So the fleet arrived on January 18 in 1788. Now, Australia Day, of course, is on January 26. So this is just a little bit before the events that came about so that we have Australia Day occurred. On January 21, Captain Arthur Phillip and some officers sailed out of Botany Bay up the coast to what was then called Port Jackson, and you can see that on the map. And they named where they landed at Port Jackson, Sydney Cove. On the 23rd of January, 2 days later, they returned to Botany Bay. And Governor Phillip gave orders that the next morning the whole fleet should sail out of Botany Bay into Port Jackson. Well, it turned out that that day there was a huge gale blowing, and it was almost impossible to get out of Botany Bay. Now, those of you who've left Sydney Airport will have flown over Botany Bay, and you probably can picture in your minds what I'm talking about. And there was another problem. The French were exploring the coast, the east coast of Australia, and there were two ships there, the Astrolabe and the Boussole. They were outside, out in the ocean, waiting to come into Botany Bay. So Arthur Phillip had this feeling that things are getting pretty urgent. There was a storm, and the French were waiting to pounce, so to speak. Anyhow, in his ship, the HMS Supply, they managed to get out of Botany Bay, although it was very, very stormy. they went into Port Jackson. And on the morning of the 26th of January, with the gale still blowing, with several officers and a whole lot of the Marines, the soldiers if you like, on board ship, the flag was planted there on the shores of Port Jackson. I should have put that slide up before, but that's the ship HMS Supply, Her Majesty's ship Supply. Now, and by the way, that's an artist's impression of the ship outside where the settlement first started. It was about a year later. The formal establishment of the colony of New South Wales did not occur on the 26th of January. It was about 2 weeks later, on the 7th of February 1788, where the colony was formally proclaimed and Governor Arthur Phillip was announced as governor. Now, Australia Day is marked from the date when Captain Arthur Phillip planted the flag, the Union Jack, on the shores of Sydney Cove, January 26, 1788. You will have noticed that in the media there's been quite a bit of debate about when we should have, if we should have, Australia Day. Some of the arguments are, well, the Aboriginal people were not taken any notice of. So currently in the media, and it'll probably hot up a bit this week because Australia Day is this Friday, the debates will continue. The Aboriginals were not consulted about establishing a colony, but Australian history records conflicts between the newly arrived settlers and the Aboriginals, although in comparison to some other countries like the United States and Canada, the conflicts here in Australia were relatively mild. So why do we have Australia Day? January 28 is a significant marker in time. It marks the beginning of what we now know as the nation of Australia. It's a celebration of our national beginnings. It marks the claiming of the land and the commencement of new ownership of this country. Other countries have their national days. I know that when my wife Artie and I and Nick were over in the Kiribati Islands, everything stopped because they had their Kiribati celebrations to mark the beginning of that country as no longer a colony, but as an independent country. Question is, does God have a Memorial Day just as we Australians have Australia Day? Well, the answer is yes. But instead of celebrating once a year, his Memorial Day is celebrated once a week. And it's part of his holy law. And we call it, and are fairly familiar with it, the Sabbath. In most countries, when they celebrate their day, their national day, it's usually a holiday. Most people, especially except those in essential services, have a day off work, where they can enjoy different kinds of activities that are generally not possible otherwise. God's Memorial Day, the Sabbath, is similar. People, including each person in a household, may take a holiday. No, not quite. Are required to take off time in order to celebrate and remember on that day. And God has given specific instructions about his day, the Sabbath, is to be celebrated. And we read this from his word in Exodus chapter 20, verses 8 to 11. Can you read that? Yep. The verses say, "Remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. 6 days shall you labour and do all your work. But the seventh day is the Sabbath of the Lord your God. In it you shall do no work, you, nor your son, nor your daughter, nor your male servant, nor your female servant, nor your cattle, nor your stranger who is within your gates." And here's the reason why. "For in 6 days the Lord made the heavens and the earth, the sea, and all that's in them, and rested the seventh day. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and hallowed it." Now, let's see if we can identify the main points. The first one is, remember the Sabbath day. This instruction is an injunction for us to keep that day, and I should say this day, as a memorial. The second thing was to keep it holy. God has given us instruction as to how we should observe this day. We are to keep the day holy. It's a day where we honour and remember God. And the next thing that we had from the text there from Exodus is do no work. The Sabbath is a holy day, a holy day, because the word holiday comes from holy day. It's where people are to have time off from everyday work and they can rest. And then it talks about who should do no work. It talks about you or me. Then it talks about you or your son and your daughter and your manservant, your maidservant, your cattle, and the stranger that's within your gates. It doesn't mention your wife, though. I've noticed that, but I think I think that's actually implied. And then the reason. For in 6 days the Lord made. Here's the reason given about our beginnings. We exist because God, the Creator, made us, including the complex environment in which we live. We are to acknowledge Him, the powerful being who made us. God Himself gave the example. He rested the seventh day. The memorial day, the Sabbath, should be a time of resting, of relaxation, and freedom from work, because the very word Sabbath means rest. Now, not only that, God didn't just give those instructions to rest, but he blessed and hallowed the seventh day of the week, which He didn't do to any other day. The seventh day, the memorial day, is not ordinary time. It's time with a difference. The time has been blessed and hallowed. That is, it's been made holy like God. You might think when you get up in the morning, oh, well, it's so many degrees outside and the birds are singing like usual, this is just a normal day. But it's not. God has placed a blessing on this day. And the Sabbath is kept, not that the day is worshipped and honoured, but the day is set aside to honour God. Now, Exodus 20 gave one reason why the day should be kept. It's a day to honour God because God is the Creator. You know, I'll go back. It's a paradox for a Sabbath-keeping Christian to believe in evolution or theistic evolution. It just doesn't fit. The Ten Commandments are found, as you probably know, in Exodus chapter 20, but they're also found in Deuteronomy chapter 5. And the wording is practically the same in both books, except with regard to this, the fourth, the Sabbath commandment. Deuteronomy 5, verse 15, if you wish to look it up, adds something not included in Exodus, and it says, "And remember that you were a slave in the land of Egypt, and the Lord your God brought you out from there with a mighty hand and by an outstretched arm. Therefore the Lord your God commanded you to keep the Sabbath day." So, what does the Israelite escape from Egypt have to do with us living in the 21st century? In fact, it's got everything to do with us. Our salvation is only possible because of what God has done. And if I'll put it another way, it's not possible to rescue ourselves from the consequences of our sins. We cannot save ourselves no matter how hard we try. So, the Sabbath points to God as both the Creator and as Deliverer. Now, if you search the Bible for a list of things to do and not to do on the Sabbath, you won't find very much. Instead, you will find broad principles. I want to share a little story with you. I have a friend who at the moment is in hospital and he's dying. We've been friends for many years, and I feel really sad that he never gave his heart to the Lord, and I'll tell you why. He was brought up in a very strict Methodist home, and his parents applied what many people have applied to the Sabbath as far as Sunday keeping. And my friend was on Sunday not allowed to go out and ride his bike. He was forbidden to play with the dog. And he was expected to go to church with his parents, and that's a reasonable expectation. But at home, to just read religious literature. What do you think the effect on him was? He hates religion. He thinks it's cruel because of the experience that he had when he was young. But you know, in the book of Isaiah, chapter 58, there are some broad guidelines given how we should observe that day. And verse 13, that's Isaiah 58, and verse 13 includes a number of things. But I want to focus on the first bit for the moment. Isaiah 58, did I say verse 13? I think I was supposed to say 23. It says, if you turn away your foot from the Sabbath, from doing your own pleasure on my holy day, and call the Sabbath a delight, and then it goes on. But you notice, the Sabbath is to be called a delight, a day to look forward to, a day that stands out above all others, not just because it's a rest day, because it is special in every aspect. Now, I don't have a mute button on the desk here to press when I have to clear my throat or something, so you'll have to forgive me. The Sabbath to be called a delight. You know, this applies especially to children, as the experience of my friend John points out. The Sabbath needs to be a day that they can look forward to with anticipation. Besides attending church, the children should love this day because it's an opportunity for the family to be together. It's an opportunity to eat special food that's not given on other days of the week. Mums, are you listening? Pardon me. It's an opportunity to engage in other family-based activities, such as taking walks in nature or for going on picnics at some nice places, to go bird watching even, or collecting shells or pretty stones. And all these activities should be fun and they should be God-focused, so that as children are out in nature and see these things, God gets the glory. Now, what does it mean to turn one's foot away from the Sabbath? Well, some versions of the Bible use this terminology. They say to stop trampling on the Sabbath. Now, the verse continues that the Sabbath we should call the holy day of the Lord honourable, and should honour him, not doing your own ways, not finding your own pleasure, and not speaking your own words. Pardon me. And then it goes on to say, then you shall delight yourself in the Lord, and I, and this is God speaking, will cause you to ride on the high places of the earth. Many years ago, when I was a student, during the school holidays, thanks Nick, I probably need a mute button too. And I'm going to tell you this story to illustrate God's blessing, where he causes us to ride on the high places of the earth. Anyhow, I used to go up into the Riverland and I used to pick apricots, which we've been doing at home, and now we're doing nectarines. But I used to pick apricots. And I remember picking apricots when the temperature was 47 degrees Celsius. No, yes, 47. It only reached 45 yesterday, and most of that time I was inside. Pity the Tour Down Under cyclists, and if you watched, you would have seen many of them dropped out. It was just too much for them. Anyhow, The weather forecast said that there was going to be very hot and very rough weather, very windy weather. Now, when you've got acres and acres of apricots that are ripe, you know it's going to happen in rough, windy weather. Knowing that this was going to happen on the Sabbath, in the latter part of the week leading up to it, we worked like fury. Long days, 14-hour days, to simply get this ripe fruit off so it could be cut and turned into dried apricots. Well, Friday afternoon came. We worked right up until, nearly sunset. And then we prayed, because the fruit block where I was working, the people were Sabbath keepers. And then we prayed and we said, Lord, you've told us to keep the Sabbath, to rest, that this day has your blessing on it. And so we commit this day and we commit this crop of fruit to you. And then we went home, had a meal, had a bath, back in the days when you bathed and didn't shower, had a bath and kept the Sabbath in accord with God's commandment. We went to church the next morning, and believe me, it was windy. Later on in the day, in the afternoon, I thought I would just hop on my bicycle and ride down the road about 5 kilometres and just observe the damage. Now, what I'm telling you is as true as the fact that I'm standing here talking to you. Block after block after block, we're talking about a fruit block, there was fruit all over the ground. Underneath the trees, it was just absolutely littered with fruit. And then I came to the block where I used to work, where that fruit crop was committed to the Lord because we were keeping the Sabbath. There was hardly anything on the ground. And what I saw will stay with me till the day when I look at the grass from the bottom up. You see, God has blessed that day, and it was good for us to honour him, and it was very good for me as a young man. Well, I probably wasn't a man at that stage. I had started shaving though. to see what God did to honour the people who honoured him on his day. The main principle of Sabbath keeping is that God is in focus. Rather than engage in activities that please ourselves, the activities that we engage in should uphold and honour God. And coming to church is one of those things. We pray, we study, we sing to his glory. Now, part of that verse that I read to you from Isaiah 58 says we should call the Sabbath a delight. But then it goes on to say we should not be doing our own pleasure. How can I find delight in the Sabbath if there's no pleasure, no personal pleasure for me if I keep that day? Seems to be a bit of a conundrum, doesn't it? You know, there are a number of activities that I personally enjoy. Four-wheel driving, especially when there are some good challenges. And motorbike riding. Jeff, you still here? Yes, motorbike riding. I enjoy shooting. I sometimes enjoy playing golf when things are going well. And I like making things, building and constructing. I enjoy travelling and gardening, and sometimes I enjoy watching programs on television. If I don't enjoy it, I turn it off. I really enjoy reading non-fiction stories. And because I'm generally up before 6 o'clock each day, now and again, I enjoy sleeping in for a bit. When I say a bit, 7:30's about the limit. But when Sabbath comes, personally, I feel that I've not honoured God if I use the day to sleep in so long that I miss church. And I personally feel very uncomfortable if I should take my four-wheel drive and go into some challenging terrain and test my driving skills. Don't think my actions would honour God if I did that. In our home, we don't watch television during the Sabbath hours. That is, from sunset on Friday to sunset on Saturday. And if we're going on holidays, maybe interstate or overseas, we try to organise our trip so that we don't need to travel on the Sabbath. If I read a book on Sabbath, it'll usually be an uplifting, true life story about how someone came to or served the Lord. We don't go shopping on the Sabbath. And I certainly don't play golf or any other competitive sport on the Sabbath. And yet we still enjoy it. You can enjoy the Sabbath, that it becomes a delight, without doing those things that would normally give you pleasure. Now, I recognise that as individuals, we must interpret the principles of the Sabbath for ourselves. And what seems right for one may not always seem right for another. Sometimes there are cultural things. It amuses me that in some countries, on a hot day like we're nearly experiencing so far, the men dress in suits, tie, long-sleeve shirt. Well, we're a little bit more relaxed about that here in Australia. But it does give me some concern when some people, although they might have had a tiring week, sleep in late, miss church, and it seems to me, whether I'm right or wrong, that they're using the Sabbath as a convenience. I ask myself, is this a holy day or is it a holiday? We read in 1 Corinthians 10:31, therefore, whether you eat or drink or whatever you do, do it all to the glory of God. Any activity that you engage in, whether during the week or on Sabbath, should be done to the glory of God, to honour Him. What we talk about, what we do, and what we think about on Sabbath should honour God. We need to remember that Sabbath's not just a day off, when, if we feel like it, we can go to church in the morning and perhaps after lunch go shopping or to the movies or some sporting fixture. No, it's not like that. The Sabbath is a memorial in time, similar to Australia Day, but dedicated to God. Today for community worship. Today to be different from any of the other days. It's a day for spiritual, emotional and relational refreshment. It's a gift of God for our benefit. Now, I've got two more stories, but I think I might have to just quit those, except this little short one. One time I was running a business and I had several people working for me. And as a Sabbath keeper, my business closed at 5 p.m. on Fridays and opened on Mondays at 8 o'clock. But the workers were not Sabbath keepers. And usually on the weekends, they would do freelance work. They were mechanics. What were the results of how we spent our free time? It turns out on the Monday mornings, I was refreshed, like my batteries were recharged. But they were tired and much less efficient than they might have been. My friends, the Sabbath is a blessing extraordinaire if we keep it the way that it was intended. A day to remember who made us and who redeemed us. The Sabbath is a special blessing. It's a beautiful gift from God. And may God bless you as you endeavour to honour him in your whole lives, and also how you keep this Memorial Day, the Sabbath.